Berlin, 1920. Smoke hung low in the air of overcrowded beer halls where angry veterans, broken workers, and bitter nationalists packed shoulder to shoulder, searching for someone to blame for Germany's humiliation. The war was over, but its wounds were still raw. Every night, men argued, drank, and dreamed of revenge. In one of these dim rooms, a young agitator with intense eyes stood before the crowd, shouting promises of rebirth, vengeance, and unity. His name was Adolf Hitler, and although few yet understood it, he was building something far more dangerous than a political movement. At his side were men who had tasted violence and found comfort in it. Former soldiers, street fighters, and radical idealists formed the backbone of his earliest protection units. These were not guards in the traditional sense. They did not simply stand watch or clear pathways. They were shock troops, enforcers who silenced hecklers, smashed opposition meetings, and turned political debate into street warfare. The early Nazi movement survived not because it convinced the nation, but because it intimidated it. The streets of Munich soon became a battlefield. Communist and socialist groups clashed almost nightly with Hitler's brown shirt followers. Fists turned into knives, knives into pistols. Each brawl hardened the men further, and each funeral created martyrs whose names were etched into the mythology of the movement. Violence became ritual. Loyalty became religion. Among these fighters was a group carefully selected to protect Hitler personally. At first, they numbered barely a handful. Their job was simple: stand between their leader and danger, no matter the cost. But over time, this small circle evolved into something else entirely. Under Heinrich Himmler's obsessive guidance, they transformed into an elite brotherhood, bound by blood, ideology, and absolute obedience. Their recruitment process was merciless. Applicants were measured, examined, interrogated, and stripped of individuality. Only those who met strict physical standards and racial requirements were permitted to continue. Weakness, doubt, or hesitation meant immediate rejection. Those who remained endured relentless training designed to destroy fear and rebuild the mind into a weapon. Sleep deprivation, brutal physical conditioning, and constant ideological indoctrination turned young men into disciplined fanatics. By the early 1930s, these men were no longer simply guards. They had become instruments of terror. While Hitler climbed the political ladder, they operated in the shadows, harassing rivals, intimidating voters, and enforcing loyalty within the party. As Germany collapsed into economic despair, millions turned to Hitler's promises. And as his popularity surged, so too did the power of his private army. But danger was growing from within. The Nazi movement had two armed wings, and they did not trust each other. On one side stood the SA, massive in number, brutal in action, and led by Ernst Röhm, an old comrade who believed the revolution was not finished. Röhm wanted to tear down Germany's old institutions and replace the army itself with his street fighters. On the other side stood the SS, smaller, disciplined, and utterly loyal to Hitler alone. Hitler understood the threat instantly. Röhm commanded millions. His ambition was dangerous. Worse, his independence was intolerable. Loyalty in Hitler's world could never be divided. It had to flow in only one direction. The purge came suddenly, without warning. In the early hours of a summer morning, black uniformed units fanned across Bavaria, armed with lists and orders that allowed no mercy. Doors were kicked in. Men were dragged from beds. Some were shot where they stood. Others vanished into prisons, never to be seen again. Ernst Röhm himself was arrested, imprisoned, and executed after refusing to take his own life. By the time the operation ended, dozens lay dead, and thousands more were terrified into silence. Germany awoke to a new reality. The SS had proven its worth. It had saved Hitler's power, and in doing so, secured its own. From that moment forward, the black uniform became a symbol of absolute authority. Courts, police, and army officers now understood that the true power in Germany wore death's head insignia and answered to no law but Hitler's will. With internal opposition crushed, the regime turned outward. Europe became the next target. When German forces crossed into Poland in 1939, SS units marched at the spearhead of invasion. Their mission was not merely military victory but psychological domination. Villages were stormed without warning. Civilians were rounded up, interrogated, and executed. Entire communities vanished overnight. Terror was not a side effect of the campaign, it was strategy. As the German war machine rolled west, the SS followed closely. In France and the Low Countries, their reputation spread ahead of them. Stories of massacres and brutality reached Allied troops long before the black uniforms did. Prisoners learned quickly that surrender to these men offered no safety. Fields, barns, and roadside ditches became execution grounds. The SS fought not as soldiers, but as executioners in uniform. Victory bred confidence, and confidence bred recklessness. As Germany expanded, the SS expanded with it, growing into massive divisions equipped with tanks, artillery, and armored vehicles. They were no longer merely guards or enforcers. They had become an army within an army, answerable only to Hitler and Himmler. But it was in the vastness of the Soviet Union that their brutality reached its darkest depths. When German forces surged eastward in 1941, the SS followed, unleashed upon a land Hitler considered racially inferior and ideologically corrupt. Town after town fell, and with each victory came retribution. Suspected partisans, political officials, Jewish families, and ordinary civilians were slaughtered en masse. Entire villages were erased from the map. Churches became execution halls. Fields became mass graves. The men responsible were not driven by battlefield necessity. They were driven by indoctrination so deep that killing had become routine. Officers demanded absolute obedience, and hesitation was treated as betrayal. Within months, the SS had turned vast regions into zones of terror. Survivors whispered of black-clad soldiers who arrived at dawn and left only silence behind. But war is merciless, even to the cruel. As Soviet resistance stiffened, German supply lines stretched thin, and winter closed in. The SS, accustomed to victory, now faced a relentless enemy who fought with desperation and fury. Entire battalions vanished in snow-covered fields. Tanks froze solid. Hunger and exhaustion gnawed at even the most fanatical troops. By 1943, the tide had turned. Soviet counteroffensives smashed through German lines, encircling divisions and cutting off retreat. SS units fought ferociously, often to annihilation, but courage and fanaticism could not overcome overwhelming numbers and industrial might. The invincible image shattered. Survivors retreated westward, carrying with them both fear and rage. As Allied forces stormed into France in 1944, the SS once again became Hitler's last hope. They were thrown into desperate counterattacks, ordered to hold ground at any cost. Entire divisions were sacrificed in futile attempts to slow the Allied advance. When encircled, they fought their way out through blood-soaked fields, leaving shattered equipment and thousands of dead behind. One of the war's darkest episodes unfolded during these final months. In the chaos of retreat, captured Allied soldiers were marched into fields and executed en masse. The killings served no strategic purpose. They were acts of spite, frustration, and indoctrinated cruelty, carried out by men who had long ceased to see enemies as human. By 1945, the SS was no longer the unstoppable force it once had been. Its divisions were shattered, its supply lines broken, and its morale fractured. Many soldiers abandoned their uniforms, hoping to blend into the civilian population. Others surrendered to Western forces, preferring captivity to the vengeance of the Red Army. Some remained fanatically loyal, retreating toward Berlin for a final, hopeless stand. As Soviet artillery closed in on the German capital, Hitler issued his last orders. Units that failed him were stripped of honor and identity. Men who had sworn oaths of eternal loyalty were cast aside, condemned as traitors. The empire they had helped build was collapsing, and its architect refused to accept responsibility. When Berlin finally fell, the SS vanished into the ruins. Some were captured. Others disappeared forever. The world soon uncovered the evidence they left behind: camps, mass graves, destroyed villages, and mountains of documents detailing industrial-scale murder. Trials followed. Survivors stood before judges, many unrepentant, some defiant, others broken. A few escaped justice, living quiet lives under false names. But history would not forget them. Their legacy became synonymous with terror, fanaticism, and the darkest depths of human cruelty. What began in smoky beer halls as a promise of national revival ended in ashes and silence. The men who once believed themselves chosen warriors of a new empire became symbols of a catastrophe that reshaped the world. Their story stands as a warning of how fear, anger, and blind loyalty can turn ordinary individuals into agents of unimaginable destruction. And in the ruins of Europe, among the shattered cities and grieving families, that lesson was written in blood.